Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Angelo Patillo. I currently serve as the director of the English Language Institute here at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. It's my great honor to welcome you all on behalf of the ELI to this celebration of the life of John Swales, both those of you in the room with us today and those of you joining us via the live stream from around the world. The ELI was John's professional home for over 4 decades, and it was a place where he remained active and engaged right up to the end of his life. I'm so pleased that John could be here with us just over a year ago in this space when we visibly and enduringly recognized this connection by renaming ELI's graduate writing clinic in his honor. John's impact on this place, its people, and the wider fields in which they inhabit was profound. And his influence will continue to be felt far into the future through the work of the countless ELI students, faculty, and staff that he so generously mentored and supported over the decades he spent here. I am one of those who hugely benefited from John's generosity of spirit. Today, I really celebrate his kindness and support when I first arrived 11 years ago as a new director. I will always remain deeply grateful to him for sharing his vast store of scholarly expertise, deep institutional knowledge, and his really profound understanding of people and how to motivate them to do their very best work. I also celebrate John, the warm, funny, and generous friend and consummate host. I will also always treasure the friendship that we developed over countless dinners and glasses of wine at his and Vi's lovely home. John was always interested in the latest happenings at the ELI. He was concerned about enrollments, how the newest faculty member was settling in, or he was keen to discuss a new journal article he'd just read. But just as often, our discussions turned to the novels we were reading, things we were watching, or his many extracurricular research interests. We'll hear about some of those later. I learned from John a lot more than I ever thought I would know about birding, butterfly counting, the postal history of British Honduras, which in typical John fashion, he specified meant the covers and the postmarks, not the stamps themselves. And of course, there was wine. To be honest, I think it was a shared taste for full-bodied, fruit-forward Spanish and Portuguese reds that brought us together more than anything else. Of course, it's impossible to separate John, the great scholar and academic leader, from John, the warm, funny friend with the wide and varied interests. Because, of course, he really was all of those things, always, all at the same time. Our wine chats often turned to shop talk, which would invariably send Vi scurrying up the stairs to her book. And as any of those who have heard him present know, John liberally sprinkled his more formal remarks with generous dollops of his droll wit, delivered with that impeccable comic timing. I feel very privileged to have known such a brilliant, complex, and warm human being, and it's an honor today to celebrate the rich, fascinating life he lived. Before I close and hand things over to Teresa, I need to thank a few people who helped make today happen. First of all, Neil McKenna, ELI's administrative specialist for overseeing all the logistics. Becca Morris at our events communication team, who designed the lovely poster and program. Brian Hunter, our events coordinator here in Weiser Hall. Jesse, Marciel, Delmar, and Kiara from our tech services team for their technical support and helping make us available to folks around the world via the live stream and the recording. And most of all, I want to thank John's family, my dear friend Vi, his son Kirby and Claire here with us in the room, his son Harvey and Anne joining us from Europe. Thank you for granting us, for trusting us with the honor of hosting you here today. And with that, I will hand you over to another longtime friend and colleague of John's, Teresa Rolk. Thank you.
Dear friends, all of you gathered here and all of those watching online, I also offer a warm welcome to you, each and all. Thank you for being present this afternoon as we celebrate the life of John Swales. I am Reverend Teresa Rolk, and I'm honored to help hold this space and time for remembering. And while, yes, I am a minister, before that I had a very long career at the ELI, starting at just about the same year John arrived there. I count him as a friend, a colleague, a teacher, and a mentor. I decided he would appreciate the mix of sacred and secular in this stole that I am wearing. It's adorned with songbirds, all of which he could identify in an instant. Now, John's death has left a space in your lives, in your hearts. And what is important to remember is that none of you are alone in facing that empty space. And so it is. We gather to remember, to celebrate, to mourn, to laugh, to cry, together. And I want to acknowledge that you each come to this space holding your own personal theological beliefs of what happens when someone dies. And it's important to recognize that each person finds comfort after facing a loss of a loved one in different ways. But one way to find comfort is in being together, in community, at a time like this. We gather for an event that John might see as a new genre, a blending of sacred and secular, and we are calling this a celebration of life, which is a common label for a gathering in religious communities after someone dies. But this space is not a church, this gathering is not a religious service, and yet there's this person here with the title of Reverend speaking to you. And at the same time, it is not solely an academic event, despite the location on a university campus, or the academic career of the one we are remembering, or the preponderance of academics who are present. Perhaps John could have done a new analysis of this event and might have even come up with a clever name for this genre. But for now, we'll go with Celebration of Life. We will hear from 6 speakers who will offer personal reflections that, by the end of this hour, will have shown us glimpses into John's life, that will expand the picture we each have of John. We will indeed celebrate his life. We'll begin with some remembrances from John's daughter Claire and son Kirby, who are also speaking on behalf of their brother Harvey, who, as you heard, is joining via live stream in England, where he's watching with John's sister Anne. Kirby and Claire.
Hi. In one of Dad's publications, his dedication said, "I would like to thank my 3 children, Claire, Harvey, and Kirby, for without whose equanimity this book would not have been possible." I asked him at that time, in my best Brummie accent, "What does equanimity mean, Dad?" And he answered, "Evenness of mind." Well, it's actually curious that he thanked us for this trait of character, when in fact we probably learnt it from him, as in spite of all his Englishman abroad's eccentricities, he himself had a certain equanimity and predictability. As children, we always knew where we stood with him and what answers to expect, and probably what he was doing wherever he was in the world. We could talk freely with him, but without dwelling on titter-tatter, and if ever he didn't agree with us about an issue, he would just very calmly say, "No, I don't think so," or "No, I don't think that would work." And that was the end of the conversation, but we respected that. Since his move to the States, obviously, we have not seen him on a regular basis, but we did maintain a healthy long-distance relationship with our father. Our exchanges were mostly based around phone conversations, but to our most pleasant surprise, we have recently discovered his correspondence box, which contains many of our letters we wrote to him as teenagers. Well, what a lovely discovery. We have thoroughly enjoyed reading them, and it gave us an insight into the easygoing relationship we had with him. And I personally was fortunate to go through this box with him in January on my visit of this year, and we had a good chuckle over some of them, and then some more pensive moments over others. He was very fond of holiday memories. Apart from his childhood holidays en famille with his cousins in Triada Bay in Anglesey, that he mentioned very regularly, we often reminisced of the most definite, unusual holidays he could organize for us as children. For example, taking a rickety bus through the desert in Sudan in the blazing heat from Khartoum to Kassala, or renting a cottage in the Andalusian mountains with no running water or lavatory, and even snakes he provided on the roof for us, or training it across the Moroccan desert, doing the overnight couchette from London to Milan, sleeping on a horsehair mattress in a pension in Portugal or Spain. There was no all-inclusive holiday complex for us, but he could occasionally succumb to the pressure from us children and give us a classically touristy experience like the Maid of the Mist in Niagara Falls. Most of the holidays involved some kind of public transport. Dad was a great defender of public transport, and he would even class a town according to its public transport system. But above all, we had to be prepared to cringe whilst Dad made some kind of embarrassing comment or joke to the drivers or the other passengers. Since becoming a grandfather to Maxime, Luca, Oliver, Arabella, and Margot, his trips to Europe, often in his Colombo Macintosh, have been about spending quality time with them. They all got to wrestle on the floor with him, read a book, learn to play poker, for goodness sake, and hear his favourite joke. What's this?
It's a dead one of those.
Right, okay. All grandchildren adhered to his passion and traipsed willingly with him through the countryside, parks, the garrigue, the waterways, the seaside, the rivers, learning about birds and butterflies, being taught how to use bins, and having a demonstration of spishing. They were lucky to avoid the odorant bird observation chips that we had to rubbish chips in the Sudan just to spot a vulture or a red kite. All will agree he became successful in the kitchen, but not necessarily the most tidiest, a good cook, but not tidy. And he more than enjoyed sharing a good meal. He prepared himself and was particularly pleased to introduce to family and friends one of his signature dishes, his Auntie Ruby's fish pie, which, as always, was accompanied with several glasses of wine. Now, I think we will be unlikely to come across a British Honduras postal stamp, but on seeing a butterfly flitter through the air, how will we not be able to have a thought for our father, a man who was one of a kind? Thank you.
I'm just going to try and summarise our remembrance remarks, add a few personal reflections and say some thank yous. So as Claire said, Dad had many characteristics. He was a scholar, a linguist, a collector, a traveller, a cook, and many more features that we all remember. Some of those characteristics have actually rubbed off onto us, his children. And in that way, we help remember him and his legacy lives on. So Harvey, my brother, has this amazing knack for memorising and recounting funny stories. Claire has really taken Dad's sociability. She's brilliant at arranging inclusive social events, celebrating achievements, chatting to everybody and bringing everyone together. I think I've picked up his love of studying and surveying the world, but I'm also definitely a very untidy cook. And more recently, I've just been reflecting on just his everyday enthusiasm for life, the small things, the weather forecast, the crossword clue, that's the shopping for dinner. And just being with him was a really joyful experience in terms of just being around that everyday positivity. And I've just been really thinking how much I valued that and how much I want to kind of try and emulate that in my own life going forward. For me, he was a really supportive, interested, and to use Claire's phrase, easygoing father. He was there at critical points in my life to provide advice, financial contributions, that friendly pat on the shoulder to help you navigate life. And I'll deeply miss our phone calls. So those were catching up with family life, work, politics, and we all know in the last few years both UK and US politics has given us lots to talk about. And I have very fond trips of our visits to Michigan, and America. You know, for teenagers from England, that was very exotic to try and travel here. And in the last couple of years, I brought my family here to spend time here and in Florida, and we've really enjoyed that time together. As Claire said, I know living away from his family was difficult for Dad, and it was also difficult for us. But it was a great comfort to us to know how happy he was here in Ann Arbor, particularly living with Vi, who, to use another English phrase, kept him on the straight and narrow, or at least tried to. And in the last few years of his deteriorating health, Vi's really cared for him, so thank you very much, Vi, for that. Ann Arbor and the Old West Side in particular were very much his adopted home, and he really was happy here, and you could tell how proud he was to live here. And that's really evident today, seeing so many people in this room. And he had such a strong community and a strong support network. And that's actually very special to us. So I wanted to thank you all for being here today, but also just being part of his life and making it so rich. And finally, I wanted to thank the ELI for facilitating, beyond his formal retirement, his continued work on linguistics. He was always telling me about his last book, his last article, his last seminar, and also recognizing his contribution both through the graduate writing clinic and today's event. He would have been very proud of what you've done for him today, and we're really grateful for that.
Thank you both. John was at heart a teacher, and so many of you in this room, including myself, have benefited from his generosity of spirit in sharing his knowledge with you, whether in a formal classroom setting or in an informal conversation. We'll now hear from Laura All, a former graduate student of John's. Former students become teachers themselves, and through that carry on the legacy John left to the academic world. Laura is currently a professor of English and director of the English writing program here at the University of Michigan. Laura.
Over the past many weeks, I have been struck by the impulse to speak of John, to tell even strangers that he read as though he suspected every text had secret pockets, which he would find and turn out with a mischievous twinkle in his eye, to tell people of how he and Vi hosted again and again in their home a place full of books and wooden furniture and red wine, a place so full of thoughts you could feel them in the air, and yet a place where your thoughts were welcome, even demanded as well. And so I thank Teresa, Angelo, and Vi for the honor to speak today, even though I am new to the genre of remarks at a celebration of life. I think the genre calls for making you all laugh as well as cry, and I am not nearly as good at making people laugh as John was. John must have known this because he was the kind of mentor who saw people just where they were and wanted to make them better, people and scholars. But John also knew and taught me that it is no matter. All we can do with new genres is try. So I will share 4 scenes, which do, for me at least, evoke both the kind of crying, the somber sweetness of this moment, and the laughter, the deep gratitude and joy for John's grand life. Scene 1. I am a new graduate student who knows nothing. I have only just begun to study genre analysis, and I read Other Floors, Other Voices, John's genre analysis of the English Language Institute and the surrounding programs in its building, with the Language and Rhetoric graduate student group at the University of Michigan. John, very agreeably, comes to speak to the group about the book, and when the facilitator opens the floor for discussion, I suggest to John that perhaps there is a disconnect between his articulated conceptualization of genre and the application of genre analysis in the book. Right. I have no idea at the time how cheeky this question is. But John graciously replies. He says he sees what I mean. And then he shares candidly his thinking for the approach he took in the book. I later discover, soon thereafter, that John is literally the global expert in genre analysis. And once I start working with him, I ask him if he was disconcerted by the cheek of my question. He says he was not, and he means it. Scene 2. John has been retired for years, but Zach Lancaster, Moises Damian Perales Escudero, Tim Green, and I want him to teach us in an independent study on corpus linguistic analysis. I am appointed the representative of the group to approach John to make the request. Without hesitations, he responds, "You do know I'm approaching my 70th birthday this term? Don't you think I might kick the proverbial bucket before the term ends?" And then he agrees. We read and write and meet weekly in the John Swales conference room in the old English Language Institute building. The conversation is lively, engaging, important. It will help steer me to a career doing analysis that still excites me to this day. Scene 3. I defend my dissertation. Afterward, my best friend in the program and his husband throw a party for me. John attends, and midway through, he clears his throat and announces he has something to read. He pulls out a poem he has written in Ogden Nash style to celebrate the occasion. The short poem contains the spot-on details of a keen observer of me as a graduate student, and it makes everyone laugh. It will be the only thing I truly remember about that day, the way John combined the significant ritual of the defense with levity and humanity. Scene 4. I am a tenured professor at Wake Forest University. I meet someone in the Caribbean who I want John to meet, and so I arrange a trip to Ann Arbor. John and Vi host us around their dining table. One of so many dinners I have enjoyed there. John makes fish pie, apparently Auntie fish pie, and it is the best fish pie my partner has had since returning to the Caribbean after his schooling in England. During dinner, John asks me if I will take the job at the University of Michigan that has just been posted to direct the writing program. I say I have no idea that the job has been posted and no intention of leaving my current job. 10 months later, I make the biggest step in my career to date, taking the position and embarking on 5 years of great learning and of numerous Sunday afternoons at John and Vi's with Angelo and sometimes others discussing the institution and the field and birds and butterflies. There are so many other scenes I could mention, as I know all of you could as well. But these, I hope, approximate the genre of remarks at the celebration of a grand life, and especially share my profound thanks to John for that life and the many other lives he brightened and moved as a part of his own. Thank you.
Thank you. As you have heard mentioned, John was an avid birder and butterflyer, if that's a word. Marcy Breslow, a friend and fellow companion in John's bird and butterfly world, will share some of her remembrances now. Marcy.
It's a pleasure to be here and to celebrate John with everybody. He was just the most remarkable person, and several of us keep saying how fortunate we were to be able to spend time with him. In June of 2021, I encountered a friendly gentleman who was using a walker far from any sidewalk at Greenview Nature Area. We were both doing butterfly counts. He was doing his part of a weekly count with a small group that he had gathered, and I was attempting a count for the city, but the training hadn't prepared me adequately, and I was about to ask the volunteer coordinator if she knew someone more experienced with whom I could go out and learn something. And then suddenly, there was John Swales. He and his main butterflying companion, Judy Lobato, welcomed me and taught me more than I could have believed possible. Almost all of it was while we were out looking for butterflies. John clearly enjoyed teaching and watching others learn at least as much as he enjoyed having opportunities for himself to be out in the field. He had been keeping records at Greenview since 2005 and wanted to do something with the data. I think some of you will probably relate to this. In late 2021, knowing that I was already hooked on butterflies and that I knew how to use Excel, he proposed that he, Judy, and I should publish a pamphlet. It would have descriptions, photos, and data about all of the butterflies that he and others had found at Greenview in all the years. Judy and I both felt a bit skeptical about the project, but John was a hard person to say no to, so we didn't. And by the following spring, we had a lovely small book filled with interesting and useful information, not just about Greenview. It cost us more to produce than we could sell it for, but it was well worth it. On a larger scale, John was instrumental in the development of 6 butterfly counts that are conducted annually in or near Washtenaw County. And all the data is sent to the North American Butterfly Association. Some of them began as long ago as 1995. When asked recently about collaborating on the start of the counts, one of his old friends said something like, "No, that was all John. He just sent us where he wanted us." Through last year, John was the person who figured out the count calendar each year and sent it to the 20 or more people who had previously participated or who had expressed interest, and made sure that all of the sort of sub-locations were covered. Somehow he knew without asking or saying anything that I would take over when he was gone. At times, John seemed like a butterfly magnet. He kept lists of each butterfly and bird species he had seen throughout the year, and he knew which ones he should have seen but hadn't. He had an amazing memory, as you all know. He was disappointed last year that he had not seen a banded hairstreak, although some had been found at Greenview, but he hadn't seen one, so it was a really bad thing. On an outing, 3 of us stopped at a not very productive location west of Ann Arbor. John stayed near the entrance while Judy and I went searching. As we returned, we saw from a distance that he was making subtle "come here" signs. And as we got close, we saw him with a banded hairstreak just sitting on his arm. Neither the location nor the behavior was even remotely normal for a banded hairstreak. When butterfly season was over, we normally birded by car. John's last outing was with Vi and me on March 2nd, a memory that both of us treasure. He was eager to go out and decided that we should wend our way toward Clinton, Michigan. It was very slow birding until we saw a large group of wild turkeys in the back of a field. Suddenly, several of them started running in the same direction. Okay. Then we realized they were chasing something. Sorry. And that something turned out to be a short-eared owl, a species that John and Vi hadn't seen in many years. And they certainly had never seen one being chased by wild turkeys. One reason that John was so eager to go out that day was that red-winged blackbirds were just starting to return from their winter vacation. And he was really hoping to see and hear the first ones of the year, because we all love the sound of the red-winged blackbirds as the first sign of spring. Well, we stopped at a rural intersection and were stunned to see at least 100 birds. They all flew into a field right across the road from us. And then we realized that there were already hundreds of blackbirds in that field, nearly all of them redwings. Then we watched for several minutes as by the hundreds they flew in and out of the field. And John was also able to add grackles to his list. So that was good. And a decent lunch at the diner in Clinton topped off the day. Knowing John greatly enriched the lives of many of us who love nature. There are endless stories to share. But more importantly, he mentored in a way that nourished our initial interest and made us want to grow in knowledge. At least in the last few years, he also attracted a small community of people who became friends and will continue his work at Greenview, as well as the annual counts. We miss him. We know he is with us every time we go out. He's there in our heads, asking questions and reminding us what to look for and where.
Thank you. There are a good number of us here who were at the ELI even before John first arrived, and Sarah Briggs was among them. Sarah will share her stories of what now might seem like ancient history at the ELI, as well as other remembrances of the person she knew who lived just up the street. Sarah.
We all have dear memories of John. His kindness, his creativity, his academic insight, his good humor. What a unique person who blessed our personal and professional lives in so many ways. I knew John for 40 years. I knew him as ELI Director and also as a friend and neighbor on the Old West Side here in Ann Arbor. I want to share just a few of the memories through the years. I actually remember when he arrived at the University of Michigan and gave a talk to our staff. He was somewhat rumpled, perhaps nervous, and suffering from jet lag, I'm sure. I wasn't quite sure what to make of this Brit, but we soon recognized we had a gem that had landed amongst us. His door was always open to us. At the time John arrived, the ELI was mainly an intensive program for ESL, for students wanting to learn English. Quality courses for U of M students who needed to improve their English for academic purposes were lacking and were being sent to a nearby language school. It was indeed serendipity that John and the Director of International Admissions in the Rackham Graduate School, Vi Benner, hit it off, which likely helped facilitate the transition of the intensive program to a quality English for academic purposes program for U of M students, both grad and undergrad. John was always one to encourage us to open our eyes, do research, analyze it, write it up. Writing it up has not been my strong point. Just a couple years after he arrived, I was investigating why the architecture program was still having concerns about the discourse skills of some of their international students. This was long before the ELI had the quality speaking courses for U of M students. My investigation revealed that they were doing fine in their design course, but they couldn't convincingly promote their design in an oral presentation. When I was slow in writing up my conclusions, what did John do? Typical supportive John. He had me over to his house at a table to write. I needed that push, and he did it in a kindly way, ending with a delicious meal, of course. Another clear memory was the support and direction he offered when I came back from a conference, all excited about a language corpus that I'd heard was being created elsewhere. What did John do? John said, well, why don't we use some of the testing fee income to develop our own corpus? And my case was born, which led eventually to a local written corpus. John led the development of analyzing the data in the corpus, first with a series of kibbutzers, as well as then presentations and papers. And it is not only the academic side of John that I have many memories of, as I expect many of you do as well. Going bird watching was always fun. I learned how to know there might be an owl in a tree by looking at the base of the big tree in the woods and finding pellets. There were many bird trips with John and his students to places like stitch-filled woods or along Scioto Church Road, and then stopping for a hearty breakfast at Stivers near Chelsea. Not only birds, but butterflies captured his attention. John knew so many things, and he shared it freely. As I mentioned, John was not only a colleague, but also a neighbor. So many of us knew John. John walked everywhere, and he liked to sit on his and Vi's 5th Street front porch, smoking and greeting everyone who passed by. John was a regular guest at Sandy Herbertson's holiday party, likely arriving with a fish pâté to share, and a cheerful attendee at the neighborhood block party. He and Vi were good friends with neighbors Chip and Judy Dupuy, and enjoyed visiting Chip and Judy one summer in their house in Newfoundland. And not so long ago, John had some of us neighbors in when he told us about his latest interest in collection of stamps from Belize, the former British Honduras. We learned that mail to Belize took an interesting path in the past, first going through Jamaica. John continued all his life to be curious. And all this time through the years, he was just the most pleasant person to have a glass of wine with and a chat. John had an impressive academic life, being asked to speak at countless conferences and universities all over the world, but he was never puffed up about himself. He enriched the lives of so many of us, including our families, by initiating a program bringing international scholars to the ELI. John was always inquisitive about each of us and our families and the world around him. We sure do miss him.
Thank you, Sarah. Betty Samraj is another former student of John's and has deep connections to the English Language Institute. She, like Laura, carries on John's legacy as a teacher. Betty is a professor of linguistics at San Diego State University. Betty?
It is an honor to be able to share some memories of John with those of you who love and admire him. I met John in the fall of 1989 when I came to Michigan to start my PhD with a research assistantship at the testing unit at ELI. I used to rise when John walked into my office because in my home culture, it was rude to remain sitting when someone with more authority was standing. Somehow from that beginning, I turned into one of his doctoral students who was comfortable enough to tease him about his clothes not matching, usually with fellow graduate student Margaret. We just thought it was great fun to say something silly and then collapse in laughter with him batting us away with, "Come on, Betty." And more seriously, John was this great scholar who just gave us so much access to his time and ideas. I think about all the ways he helped me with all the resources and opportunities he sent my way. He got me the opportunity to teach an introductory class in linguistics, the opportunity to work at the business school as a writing consultant, the job of a tutor at the graduate writing clinic, teach in the summer business program, and so on. I realized that he did the same for so many others. The generosity and care he showed me was just multiplied many times. Thinking about him after he passed away, I am just struck by the magnitude of what he did for others. I also have been thinking that John had this magical quality of helping you without making you feel inadequate. It's hard to explain, but I think it's a quality few have. Choosing to work with him for my dissertation was the best choice I made in my PhD experience. However, I did not set out to work on my dissertation with John. John would ask me, after I had completed my qualifying exams, what I had decided to do for my thesis work, and I was always unsure, diffident. I flirted with different areas in linguistics and in fact started a plan to work in typology. However, after a little while, I decided that wasn't for me, and I decided I wanted to work with John after all. And I was nervous about how he'd respond. But there was no, yeah, finally, or you could have done this sooner. I had gone around the block in a sense, but John didn't try to make me feel bad. In fact, he never ever did that to any of us. I don't think I realized what a great scholar John was when I first started working with him because he was just so personable and accessible. John was so human that you didn't realize what a star he was. He was crazily prolific, but he also told us about his failures during the doctoral group meetings, like having an abstract rejected from the American Association of Applied Linguistics. We were all indignant, of course, but it was instructive for us to find out that that could happen even to him. John also shared amusing stories with us. I worked as his editorial assistant for ESP while he was co-editor for the journal. John told me one day when I reported for my editorial assistant duties that he had just received a letter from an author saying that he, John, had rejected a manuscript that had never been submitted to ESP. Presumably, Anne Johns, another co-editor, had picked up this paper, which had been delivered at a Four Seas conference for John, and it had gotten mixed in with submissions to ESP, and John had rejected this paper. And he now had the task of responding to that unhappy author. And I'm sure John figured out the very occluded genre of an apology for a rejection of a non-submission to a journal. John was, of course, the master doctoral dissertation supervisor, nudging us along to work on our research and being oh so prompt in giving us feedback on our chapters. I'd think I'd have a break for a few days because I'd revised a chapter, but no, the phone would ring and it would be John saying he'd read the chapter and did I want to come around to his house and pick it up and go over it. So when we graduated, and as we moved on in our lives and careers, John kept in touch with us. I remember John calling me to tell me when he first saw a publication of mine cited. He was always so happy with our successes. I have a very special memory of inviting John to join my master's level ESP class in fall 2020 when we were all teaching via Zoom during the COVID era. John didn't have Zoom on his computer yet, so he was going to call in. He was that phone icon on my Zoom class. My MA students had questions already, and it was just a special time for them. John couldn't see us, but I could see the expressions on my students' faces, and one student sent me a chat message saying, "I can't believe we are speaking to Professor Swales." And John asked them all about their research projects, rattled off relevant references, and invited them to email him. After that Zoom visit to my class, I started organizing Zoom calls with the four of us who made the doctoral group in the mid-90s, Sunny, Margaret, Kirsten, and me. And we had these Zoom calls every 6 to 8 weeks on Saturday mornings from January 2021 to the last one on March 1, 2025. We hugely enjoyed those, with John asking us about our lives and talking about books and politics, Vi's garden, the cats, and what John was writing right up to the end. On some occasions, I invited people John wanted to include, like Bjorn from Sweden, Didar from Turkey, or Dan Mede, the admin coordinator in linguistics, when we had been students here. Those are sweet memories. I'll end with a few comments about John's social side, which we've already heard about. I have enjoyed many dinners at John and Vi's home. Like many of you, it was such a treat for us grad students to enjoy his fish pie and the dessert of mango with honey and poppy seed, and also very fun because Vi would always take our side against John. And John and Vi have been so hospitable during my trips back to Ann Arbor during the last several years, including the week I had here during my sabbatical in fall 2021, and even just last year. I'll end with two short stories. I was to leave Ann Arbor to take my first job at a university in Louisiana in August 1995. One day I was walking home with John from the ELI. We lived in the same direction. We were walking through the Diag, John smoking. You could smoke on campus then, just not inside buildings. Briefcase in the other hand, walking, looking up, the birds. And walking alongside like that, John asks me if I need money because my first paycheck would not arrive till October at the new job. Here I was, an international student from Singapore, starting a new job, and John had thought about me not having enough money. He was right. I needed money to tide me over till that first paycheck in October. I thanked him and told him that my father was going to be sending me a money order to Louisiana. 2 Fridays ago, I told some of my graduating MA students that John had passed away. These young women who had taken an ESP class with me last fall looked at me and said sincerely with feeling, "Oh, that is so sad." Maybe seeing some surprise on my face at their response, they said, trying to explain, "We knew Swales. We feel that we know him. We read all his work." Well, not all his work, but I thought that's what I can do. I can make sure my students in ESP and genre analysis seminars know John. John has been a great role model for what I can be as a professor in helping my students with their research endeavors, but I can also simply make sure that my students know John. I will miss John always, and I will always be wanting to impress him, even if he's not here to be impressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. So you heard Sarah mention the My Case, a corpus of spoken English. And as ELI lecturers, many of us mined that corpus for EAP materials. And a favorite use of the corpus was to look at collocations, words that go with other words. And perhaps there's no collocation more famous in the field of English for academic purposes than Swales and Feek. So I invite Chris Feek, a lecturer at ELI, John's co-author, colleague, and friend, to share her remembrances. Chris.
Never thought I was a collocation. I love that. I'll put that on my CV, I think, right? It's great to see so many of you here, friends, former colleagues, and others from the birding and butterfly community. Being the last to speak is tough. We've heard so many wonderful things about John, so many wonderful stories, and I thought, what can I possibly do that isn't just going to repeat what everybody has said? We know that John was an incredible scholar, a truly generous person, so positive. He once said to me in my office, "I walk around in my own bubble of sunshine." And I wrote that down, and I have it taped to my desk, so that when I'm having a bad day, I remember I'm going to walk around in my own bubble of sunshine. I'm going to cherish all the memories I have of John, just like everybody else in this room. But one thing I thought I could share with everybody is probably the most profound impact John had on me and so many others in this room, whether it was an academic connection or a butterfly or birding connection or even a parent-to-child connection. And that is his incredible interest and passion for mentoring and collaborating with others. So many of you have mentioned the collaborations that you've had with John over the years, how much you've learned from him. And it was an absolute honor to learn from him for over 30 years. I knew John longer than I knew my own father. It's hard to believe that, but it dawned on me a month ago that, wow, he has really played a huge role in my life and in the lives of everyone in this room. John and I did a lot of collaborating. We co-taught ELI 620 and 621, for those of you who know it. I was scared to take on that class, but John said, "Oh, no, you can do it," right? He always thought everyone could do things, right? And he would always push you to do the things you thought you couldn't do. So we co-taught, right? I learned it from the best I could have ever learned from. We did other classes and seminars together. We did workshops at Rackham. We gave talks together. We wrote book chapters. We wrote journal articles. And he didn't do those things just with me. He did that with everybody that he came in contact with because he just wanted to share what he knew. And of course, we did a lot of collaborating on our writing textbooks, and I'll talk a bit about those later. But at the beginning, I really feel like John was just pulling me along, right? It was kind of like follow the leader here. But eventually, that relationship of me following the leader changed into one of mutual respect and admiration for each other, I should say. He, as I think Betty may have said and others, he had a knack for seeing potential in people, even when they couldn't see that potential in themselves.
I mean, he would find out that, oh, I have this, I've been asked to go to Brazil. Well, I can't do it. Chris, why don't you go to Brazil? I'm like, what am I going to do in Brazil? What do I know, right? They wanted you, not me, right? Oh, well, you know, I don't have time, so I think you should go. And at first I would grumble. I'm saying, does he have any idea how much work that is for someone who doesn't know that much? But no, I went, right? And he would often quote Pasteur and say, well, chance favors the prepared mind, Chris. You just need to go. Keep an open mind. You'll do it. You'll be able to do it. Don't worry. So John took the time for that potential in all of us to flourish. And that's something that I think was really special about John. He did it for me. He did it for Laura. He did it for Betty. He did it for Dasha Dressen, Annalie Adel, Uta Rimmer. I mean, I could go on and on and on. The number of people, the Butterfly Group as well, how he mentored everybody there. And the Morley scholars, those of us that remember our Morley scholars, and all these wonderful scholars like Ana Moreno and Carmen Perez-Yantara from Zaragoza. Remember the Zaragoza cohort that we used to see year after year. He took all of us who kind of felt like nobodies and helped us become contributors to the field. Just think about the number of people in this room and around the world that John took an interest in and mentored over the years. And I want to talk a little bit about academic writing for graduate students, my collocation, thank you. I don't remember the exact conversation we had about my collaborating with him. He had just finished genre analysis. We all know that, right? What a seminal book that is. And he was really keen on turning his thoughts and ideas from the book into classroom teaching materials. And he could have done that himself. He'd been teaching much longer than I had been teaching. He really didn't need me, but for whatever reason, he said, do you want to do this? I think that's what he said. And for a while, I thought he only brought me on board because I knew how to use a computer way better than he did, right? You remember John Pecky like this, right? The two-finger approach. And if you recall the early days of email attachments, oh my gosh, right? I think I got every email attachment he had or needed to send for about 4 years. Or I thought, well, maybe he brought me on board because I was one of the few people who could decipher his handwriting, right? Do you all remember his handwriting, right? Rosemary also could do that pretty well. But in the end, I understood that there was something else John saw in me. I don't know what it was, but he saw something. And maybe it was because I was willing to challenge his ideas or ask a cheeky question, as we heard from Laura here. Or someone who could bring in a perspective that was just a little bit different. You know, how would a newcomer to the field actually approach this, right? As someone who's very senior with years and years of experience, he would look at things one way, but someone who is brand new to the field would look at it very, very differently. He loved a good challenge to his ideas. Right? He was never happy to just settle, well, I'm the big famous person, this is how it is, this is how it's gonna be. He had high standards, for sure. But it was always a matter of give and take with John, right? It was never, I know more than you, so this is how it's going to be. It was always a matter of kind of massaging our ideas until they became something that made sense to both of us. His feedback, almost always written in green. Do you all remember the green pens, right? Had to have a green pen. It could not be purple, black, red, blue, nothing. Always green. I still have a green pen in my desk drawer, just to remind myself. The feedback was always gentle, but very helpful. He would ask questions. Are you sure about this, Chris? Or, I think we may need something else here. Always hedged and very, very cautious. But he would never tell me exactly what he wanted, which was so frustrating, right? I mean, if it's not right, then just tell me what you want. But that was part of his mentoring, right? You don't tell someone what to do. You tell them something needs to be done and let them figure that out for themselves, right? By learning for yourself what needed to be done, you really were able to move forward. So I went back to the drawing board a number of times, guessing what John wanted, trying to think like John, and eventually I said, I can't think like John. I'm not John. I'm going to think like me, and hopefully whatever I come up with will meet his expectations. But then there were those check marks. Those of you that worked with John, the check marks, you remember the check marks? One check mark was like, oh man, this is just awesome. 2 check marks, you were on cloud 9, right? And then if there was a comment after the 2 check marks, like brilliant, that would keep me going for months, right? And I thought, oh, I don't know what I did, but whatever it was, he said it was brilliant. So, I'm going to take this. At first, I didn't know what those check marks meant. I don't know about the rest of you, but I saw them. For me, check mark meant it was bad, right? Because we got a check mark when I was in grade school when we had made a mistake. I don't know if that was everyone else's experience. But when I figured out that this was a good thing, I was so excited. Over time, though, we built a very good, trusting relationship. John's strengths, of course, were absolutely apparent to all of us. But then I was able to see my own strengths by working with him. And of course, we had our disagreements. He once threw me out of his office. I don't know if anybody knew that, but he did once throw me out because we were disagreeing. Very nicely, though, let me say, very gentlemanly. He just said, "Chris, get out." Yeah. Yeah. But then came back about an hour later and gave me a big hug, and life was good again. But we had our disagreements about things, especially when we were working on our textbook. I was never a big fan of the sentence ordering tasks, but eventually he won me over. I never really was all that fond about his text that he wrote about badgers, birds, and butterflies. And not that I'm not interested in that, but it was hard for him to understand why other people weren't excited about badgers, birds, and butterflies. But we compromised, right? And that was one of the beautiful things with John, that he was always willing to bend a bit in your direction, right? And find some middle ground so that you could always move forward. And much of what we disagreed upon eventually made it into our materials, into our books in some form. Usually not the way it was originally written, but it was there. We learned to trust each other's instincts over time, and I really value that. Just knowing that someone has such confidence in you makes a huge difference in your life. I'm still on the fence about his use of satirical text to illustrate genre moves. And I have to share this last one that he came up with for the 4th edition of academic writing for graduate students. He wrote an introduction on the relationship between the world economy and the U of M basketball team. I don't know where that came from, and we'll never know, but he wrote this amazing text mentioning all the different coaches, the Fab Five, hemlines on women's skirts, and it's just really an amazing text. And John had that playfulness about him that made it really fun to be with him all the time. He didn't take himself too seriously, which I think is a really wonderful quality in someone who was as accomplished as he is. But John never stopped working, right? He worked all the way through March. In the 12 months prior to his passing, we were collaborating quite a bit. We published an article in second language writing, and I was so honored when he entrusted to me the most important part of the paper. I didn't expect that, but it was clear to me at that point that he was passing the baton on. He said, "Chris, you take this." It still gives me chills to think about it, and I won't tell you which part of the paper it is. You have to go read it. But it was something I did not expect to be given to me. We did an online literature review workshop for scholars in Spain and had a wonderful time squeezed in my office where there's barely room for one chair in front of the computer, but John insisted on sitting next to me. We were elbow to elbow. He was in excellent form, great sense of humor, and everybody in that seminar was just focused on him and enjoying every moment. We've been working on revising the 4th edition of academic writing for graduate students, and in our last conversation, of course, what did we talk about? Not how he was doing, how he was feeling. We talked about work. We need to get together and talk about this last chapter, Chris. We didn't have that conversation, but I did promise to him that I would finish the book, and even though it will be very difficult, it will get done, hopefully by the end of the year. So John was a wonderful collaborator, a wonderful mentor. He nudged us forward, he pushed us, he empowered us with the tools we needed to move forward. He truly made a difference in all of our lives through the connections and collaborations he so effortlessly cultivated, and we will miss him dearly. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to add one short personal reflection that is actually an illustration of what Chris was talking about with John recognizing potential. He had started an ELI class specifically for students in the Architecture and Urban Planning School, and you heard from Sarah how he had encouraged her to write up her research, and that collaboration with John planted seeds for that program. He taught the newly created course himself for a few years, and then he decided to move on to other teaching adventures, which meant the course was open for a new instructor to take on. And I was a relatively new lecturer at the ELI then, but John approached me and asked me if I would be interested. And I think he saw my potential in taking that course forward and how compatible the topic and the content was for me. He trusted me with this thing he created, and yet he was never possessive about it. He never tried to impose his prior plans on my work. And so it became my child then, and of course I often talked to him about it and sought advice. But that act of generosity and insight in believing in my potential when I didn't quite believe it myself changed my life as a teacher. And I'm grateful I had chances to express my gratitude to him for that leap of faith he took over 20 years ago. I think we've heard in the reflections over this past hour how John was a person of faith in the humanistic sense, of faith in the potential and creativity of all other humans he interacted with. And while John would not identify as religious, I would argue that in fact he was among the most religious persons I've known. There are multiple interpretations of the etymology of the word religion, but one understanding is from the Latin root religare, to tie or bind fast. And that makes sense if you think of organized religion's purpose is to bind together a group of people who think alike. But I can't think of anyone in academia who has done this successfully as John, connected with people, created a space for people who share a belief in language and genre, in students and in teaching, who share the values of generosity and curiosity in the intellectual world and the natural world, to bind them together into a community that from what we see here today, that continues to thrive and grow. Whether it was for genre analysis, English for academic purposes, for the birds and butterflies of Washtenaw County, John connected and reconnected religiously. At the start, I noted we were holding this space to remember, to celebrate, to laugh, and to cry, and to grieve. Remember that each experiences grief differently, and let me reassure you that your grief does not follow a fixed timeline. There's no point at which we say, it's done, no more grief, we've gone through the process, check, it's all good. It just doesn't happen that way. Grief remains, and it's okay that it does. But what happens through gatherings like this and through our connections with Vi and John's family, we start to build around that grief through our connections with each other. We build around our grief a cushion for when the days when grief becomes more present, and it can return to us when we least expect it. Maybe when a butterfly lands, or the next time you open up AWG in a classroom, or when you pass that porch and recall the faint smell of a cigarette. Dear ones, John lived a full, amazing, generous, curious, and remarkable life. We are each blessed to have intersected with him in some way. We in the world are so much better for his having lived. Go in peace, dear ones. Amen. Let us continue, though, to celebrate in a way John would have approved of, with refreshments. And while I believe there's no fish pie, I'm sorry, there most certainly is some wine. So please continue to share your remembrances with each other and with the family during the reception. And for those of you online, please raise a glass with us from afar. And a note, there will be a slideshow running with some really lovely images. That slideshow will continue on the live stream as well. So if you're watching on live stream, stick around and you can watch those with us too. Food and drinks are all over to this side, so please join us for that. Thank you.